the discovery, Elliot Grayson had always been drawn to the past. As a freelance photographer, he spent most of his days capturing the present, but his heart belonged to the forgotten corners of history. Abandoned buildings, crumbling cemeteries, and antique shops were his haunts. It was in one such shop, tucked away in a quiet alley of the city, that he found the camera. The shop was dimly lit, its shelves crammed with relics of bygone eras. Dust motes floated in the air, catching the faint light from a single bulb hanging overhead. Elliot's eyes scanned the clutter, searching for something, anything, that might spark his curiosity. And then he saw it. The camera was an old Rolleiflex, its leather casing worn but intact. The twin lenses stared back at him like unblinking eyes. Something about it called to him, a whisper from the past that he couldn't ignore. The shopkeeper, an elderly man with a face as weathered as the items he sold, noticed Elliot's interest. "That's a special one," the shopkeeper said. His voice, low and gravelly, came from an estate sale, belonged to a photographer who, well, let's just say he had a unique perspective. Elliot didn't ask for details. He didn't need to. The camera was already in his hands, its weight solid and reassuring. He paid the man and left, the Rolleiflex tucked safely in his bag. That night, Elliot cleaned the camera meticulously, polishing the lenses and adjusting the settings. It was in remarkable condition for its age, and he couldn't wait to test it out. The next morning, he headed to the old Greenwood Cemetery, a place he'd photographed countless times before. But this time, he felt a strange anticipation, as if the camera had something to show him. He set up the Rolleiflex on its tripod and peered through the viewfinder. The cemetery was bathed in the soft light of dawn, the tombstones casting long shadows. He took a deep breath and pressed the shutter release. The sound of the shutter was sharp, almost startling in the stillness. Elliot wound the film and took another shot, then another. He spent hours there, capturing the quiet beauty of the place. When he finally packed up and headed home, he felt a sense of satisfaction he hadn't felt in years. But when he developed the photos, everything changed. The first few images were normal, just as he'd expected. But as he flipped through the contact sheet, his heart began to race. In one photo, a faint figure stood beside a tombstone, its form translucent and ethereal. In another, a pair of glowing eyes peered out from the shadows. And in the last photo, a woman in a flowing dress stood in the center of the frame, her face turned toward the camera as if she knew he was there. Elliot's hands trembled as he held the photos up to the light. He told himself it was a trick of the light, a double exposure, anything but what it appeared to be. But deep down, he knew. The camera had captured something beyond the living world. He spent the rest of the night poring over the photos, his mind racing with questions. What had he stumbled upon? And more importantly, what did it mean? The spirits awaken. Elliot couldn't sleep. The images from the Rolleiflex haunted him, not just in his mind but in the very air around him. He felt a presence, a subtle shift in the atmosphere of his small apartment. The shadows seemed deeper, the silence heavier. He tried to convince himself it was just his imagination, but the photos on his desk told a different story. The next morning, he decided to test the camera again. This time, he chose an abandoned asylum on the outskirts of the city, a place rumored to be haunted. If the camera truly captured spirits, this would be the perfect location to find out. The asylum loomed before him, its broken windows like empty eye sockets. The air was thick with the scent of decay, and the crunch of broken glass under his boots echoed through the empty halls. Elliot set up the Rolleiflex in what had once been the main ward, its high ceilings and peeling walls creating a haunting backdrop. He took a series of photos, each click of the shutter sending a shiver down his spine. The camera felt heavier in his hands, as if it were resisting him. But he pressed on, driven by a mix of curiosity and dread. When he developed the photos later that evening, his worst fears were confirmed. The images were filled with figures, ghostly apparitions that seemed to move within the frames. Some were faint, mere wisps of light, while others were disturbingly clear. A child stood in the corner of one photo, her eyes wide and pleading. In another, A man in a straitjacket lurched toward the camera, his face twisted in agony. Elliot's hands shook as he stared at the photos. This wasn't just a camera that captured ghosts. It was a window into another world, and the spirits in the photos seemed aware of him. Their eyes followed him as he moved, their expressions shifting as if they were trying to communicate. That night, the dreams began. He found himself standing in the asylum, the Rolleiflex hanging from his neck. The air was cold, and the sound of distant whispers filled his ears. The figures from the photos surrounded him, their faces filled with sorrow and anger. They reached out to him, their hands passing through him like smoke. He woke in a cold sweat, the camera sitting on his nightstand, its lenses glinting in the moonlight. The next day, Elliot decided to research the camera's history. He visited the antique shop where he'd bought it, but the shopkeeper was gone. The store was empty, a for rent sign taped to the window. Desperate for answers, he turned to the internet, scouring forums and archives for any mention of the Rolleiflex. After hours of searching, he found a thread on a paranormal forum. It mentioned a photographer from the 1940s who had disappeared under mysterious circumstances. The man, named Victor Hargrove, was said to have used a camera that could capture spirits. According to the thread, Hargrove had become obsessed with the camera, believing it allowed him to communicate with the dead. But something had gone wrong. The spirits he captured began to manifest in the real world, and Hargrove was never seen again. Elliot's heart raced as he read the thread. The parallels were undeniable. He was following in Hargrove's footsteps, and he had no idea how to stop it. That evening, he took the camera to a local park, hoping to capture something less sinister. But as he peered through the viewfinder, he noticed something strange. The park was empty, but the lens showed a crowd of people, ghosts, their faces frozen in expressions of joy, sorrow, and anger. He snapped a photo, and as the shutter clicked, he felt a sudden gust of wind. The temperature dropped, and the air around him seemed to hum with energy. When he developed the photo, he saw something that made his blood run cold. The ghosts in the image were no longer static. They were moving, their forms shifting and twisting as if trying to escape the frame. And in the center of the photo, a figure stood. A man in a tattered suit, his eyes glowing with an otherworldly light. He was looking directly at Elliot, his lips curled into a sinister smile. Elliot realized then that the camera wasn't just a gateway for spirits to enter the living world. It was a tool for them to manipulate it. And they were growing stronger. The gateway widens. Elliot's life began to unravel. The camera, once a fascinating relic, now felt like a curse. The spirits in the photos grew bolder, their movements more pronounced. They no longer waited for him to develop the images. They appeared in the viewfinder, their ghostly forms flickering in and out of focus as if they were trying to break free. One evening, as Elliot sat at his desk, he noticed something strange. The photo of the man in the tattered suit, the one with the glowing eyes, had changed. The figure was no longer confined to the frame. His hand stretched outward, fingers curling as if grasping for something. Elliot's breath caught in his throat as the hand seemed to twitch, the paper rippling slightly. He threw the photo into a drawer and slammed it shut, his heart pounding. But the damage was done. The spirits were no longer content to exist in the photos. They were reaching into his world. That night, Elliot experienced his first full-blown encounter. He was in his darkroom, developing a new set of photos, when the temperature plummeted. His breath came out in visible puffs, and the red light above him flickered. He turned around, and there, standing in the corner, was the man from the photo. His suit was tattered, his face gaunt, and his eyes glowed with an unnatural light. "You've opened the door," the man said, his voice a hollow echo. "And now you must face the consequences." Elliot stumbled backward, knocking over a tray of chemicals. The man advanced, his form flickering like a broken film reel. Just as he reached out to grab Elliot, the red light burst, plunging the room into darkness. When Elliot fumbled for the switch and turned on the overhead light, the man was gone. But the encounter left him shaken. He knew he couldn't keep the camera. It was too dangerous. The next morning, he took it to a local historian, Dr. Evelyn Marsh, who specialized in paranormal artifacts. He hoped she could help him understand and perhaps destroy the cursed object. Dr. Marsh's office was cluttered with relics and books, the air thick with the scent of old paper and incense. She listened intently as Elliot explained his story, her sharp eyes narrowing as he described the camera and its effects. "This isn't just a camera," she said, examining the Rolleiflex with a mix of fascination and dread. "It's a conduit, a bridge between the living and the dead. And if what you're saying is true, the spirits are using it to cross over." "Can it be destroyed?" Elliot asked, his voice trembling. Dr. Marsh hesitated. "It's not that simple. The camera is bound to the spirits it captures. Destroying it could release them entirely, allowing them to roam freely in our world. But if we don't do something, they'll continue to grow stronger." She suggested a ritual, a way to sever the connection between the camera and the spirits. It would require gathering specific items: a lock of hair from a living person, a vial of holy water, and a photograph of the camera's original owner, Victor Hargrove. Elliot agreed to help, desperate for a solution. The search for Hargrove's photograph led them to an old archive in the city's library. After hours of digging, they found a faded newspaper clipping from 1947. It showed a man holding the Rolleiflex, his face gaunt and haunted. The caption read, "Local photographer vanishes amid paranormal claims." As Elliot stared at the photo, he felt a strange connection to Hargrove. The man's eyes seemed to bore into his, as if warning him of the dangers ahead. But there was no turning back now. That night, they performed the ritual in Dr. Marsh's office. She lit candles and drew a circle of salt around the camera, placing the items they'd gathered in the center. Elliot recited the incantation she'd written, his voice shaking as the air grew heavy with energy. But something went wrong. As Elliot spoke the final words, the camera began to vibrate, its lenses glowing with an eerie light. The spirits in the photos screamed, their forms writhing as if in agony. The room filled with a deafening roar, and the candles were snuffed out in an instant. When the chaos subsided, Elliot and Dr. Marsh were alone. The camera lay on the floor, seemingly unharmed. But the photos they'd used in the ritual were gone, vanished without a trace. "It didn't work," Elliot said, his voice hollow. "Dr. Marsh shook her head, her face pale. "No, it made things worse. The spirits are free now, and they're coming for you." The spirits close in. The days that followed were a blur of fear and desperation. Elliot's apartment became a battleground. The spirits, no longer confined to the photos, manifested at will. Shadows moved on their own, whispers echoed through the halls, and objects flew off shelves as if hurled by invisible hands. The man in the tattered suit, Victor Hargrove, Elliot now realized, was the most persistent. He appeared in mirrors, in the corner of Elliot's vision, and even in his dreams, his glowing eyes filled with malice. Dr. Marsh worked tirelessly to find another solution, scouring ancient texts and consulting with other experts in the paranormal. But time was running out. The spirits were growing stronger, their presence more oppressive. Elliot could feel them closing in, their cold fingers brushing against his skin when he least expected it. One night, as Elliot sat alone in his apartment, the camera began to act on its own. It sat on his desk, its lenses clicking and whirring as if taking photos of its own accord. The sound was maddening, a constant reminder of the curse he couldn't escape. When he finally mustered the courage to look at the photos it produced, he wished he hadn't. The images were horrifying. They showed his apartment overrun with spirits, their twisted forms filling every corner. In one photo, Elliot himself was surrounded, his face frozen in terror. In another, the man in the tattered suit stood over him, his hand outstretched as if to claim his soul. Elliot knew he couldn't stay there. He packed a bag and fled to Dr. Marsh's office, the camera tucked under his arm. She greeted him with a mixture of relief and concern, her office now cluttered with even more books and artifacts. "I think I found something," she said, holding up an ancient tome. "There's a ritual that might work, but it's dangerous. It requires binding the spirits back into the camera and then destroying it in a sacred fire." But there's a catch. You'll need to confront Victor Hargrove directly. He's the one anchoring the spirits to our world. Elliot's stomach churned at the thought. How do I confront him? You'll need to enter the spirit realm, Dr. Marsh explained. The camera can take you there, but once you're inside, you'll be vulnerable. If you fail, you could be trapped forever. Elliot hesitated. The idea of willingly stepping into the spirit realm was terrifying, but he had no other choice. The spirits were already tearing his life apart, and he knew it was only a matter of time before they claimed him completely. They prepared for the ritual that night. Dr. Marsh drew a complex sigil on the floor, placing the camera in the center. She handed Elliot a small vial of liquid, a potion that would allow him to cross over. Once you're there, find Hargrove, she instructed. He's the key to all of this. Confront him, and the spirits will lose their hold. Elliot nodded, his hands trembling as he uncorked the vial. He drank the potion in one gulp, its bitter taste making him gag. Almost immediately, the room began to spin, the walls dissolving into a swirling void of darkness. He felt himself falling, the camera clutched tightly in his hands. When he opened his eyes, he was no longer in Dr. Marsh's office. He stood in a desolate landscape, the sky a sickly green and the ground littered with ash. The air was thick with the stench of decay, and the distant wails of the dead echoed in his ears. The spirit realm. Elliot's heart pounded as he took a step forward, the camera hanging from his neck. He could feel the spirits around him, their presence pressing in from all sides. But he forced himself to focus. He had to find Hargrove. After what felt like hours, he came upon a crumbling mansion, its windows shattered and its doors hanging off their hinges. Inside, he found Hargrove. The man sat in a decrepit chair, his glowing eyes fixed on Elliot as he entered. "You shouldn't have come here," Hargrove said, his voice dripping with malice. "This is my domain now, and soon it will be yours too." Elliot swallowed his fear and stepped forward. "I'm not here to stay. I'm here to end this." Hargrove laughed, a sound that sent chills down Elliot's spine. "You think you can stop me? You're just a pawn like all the others who came before you. The camera chooses its victims, and it will never let you go." Elliot tightened his grip on the camera. "Then I'll destroy it." Hargrove's laughter died, his expression turning deadly serious. "You can try, but you'll never escape this place." Before Elliot could respond, the room filled with spirits, their twisted forms closing in around him. He raised the camera and began to take photos, the flash momentarily driving them back. But they kept coming, their screams filling his ears. In the chaos, Hargrove lunged at him, his hands clawing at the camera. Elliot fought back, the two of them grappling for control. The camera slipped from his grasp and hit the floor, its lenses cracking. A blinding light erupted from it, engulfing the room. When the light faded, Elliot was alone. The mansion was gone, replaced by an endless void. The camera lay at his feet, its lenses shattered. But he could still feel the spirits around him, their presence stronger than ever. He had failed. The final exposure. A voice he recognized. It was Dr. Marsh, faint and distant, but unmistakable. "Elliot, can you hear me?" He turned, searching for the source of the voice. "Evelyn, where are you?" "I'm still in the living world," she replied, her voice strained. "I've been trying to reach you. The ritual didn't fail completely. There's still a connection between our worlds, but it's fading. You need to come back now." Elliot's heart raced. "How? The camera's broken. I'm trapped here." "The camera isn't the only link," Dr. Marsh said urgently. "You are. The spirits are drawn to you because you've been using the camera. You need to sever that connection. Let go of it. Completely." Elliot looked down at the broken Rolleiflex. It had been his obsession, his curse, and now it was his only hope. But Dr. Marsh was right. He had to let it go. He knelt and picked up the camera, its weight heavy in his hands. The spirits were almost upon him, their cold breath on his neck. He closed his eyes and focused on the connection, the invisible thread that bound him to the camera and the spirits it had captured. "I release you," he whispered, his voice trembling. "I release all of you." The camera began to glow, a soft light that grew brighter with each passing second. The spirits screamed, their forms dissolving into the light. Elliot felt a tug, as if the void itself were pulling him back. "It's working." Dr. Marsh's voice was clearer now. "Hold on, Elliot. You're almost there." The light became blinding, and Elliot felt himself falling again. When he opened his eyes, he was back in Dr. Marsh's office, the camera lying in pieces on the floor. The air was still, the oppressive presence of the spirits gone. Dr. Marsh knelt beside him, her face pale but relieved. "You did it," she said. "The connection is severed. The spirits are gone." Elliot sat up, his body aching as if he'd been through a battle. "Are you sure?" She nodded. "The camera is just an object now, a broken one at that. The spirits have no way to cross over anymore." Elliot stared at the shattered camera, a mix of emotions swirling inside him. Relief, yes, but also sorrow. He had been drawn to the camera because of his love for the past, but it had nearly cost him his future. He had faced the darkness and come out the other side, but he knew he would never be the same. In the weeks that followed, Elliot tried to return to his normal life. He took on new photography projects, focusing on the present rather than the past. But the memories of what he had seen and what he had lost lingered. He often found himself glancing over his shoulder, half expecting to see a ghostly figure in the corner of his vision. One evening, as he was sorting through old photos, he came across the first image he had taken with the Rolleiflex, the one of Greenwood Cemetery. The faint figure beside the tombstone was gone, the photo now just an ordinary snapshot. He felt a pang of sadness, not for the camera, but for the souls it had trapped. He decided to visit the cemetery one last time. The sun was setting, casting a golden glow over the tombstones. Elliot stood in silence, the weight of his experiences settling over him. He had faced the unknown and survived, but he knew there were some mysteries best left untouched. As he turned to leave, he noticed something on the ground, a small, weathered photograph. He picked it up and froze. It was a picture of Victor Hargrove, his face gaunt and haunted, just like in the newspaper clipping. But this time, there was something different. Hargrove's eyes were no longer filled with malice. They were sad, almost pleading. Elliot felt a chill run down his spine. He tucked the photo into his pocket and walked away, the shadows of the cemetery stretching long behind him. The camera was gone, but its legacy would always remain. And Elliot knew that, no matter how far he ran, the past would always find a way to catch up with him.